Hello again. It's me, Julie, and this lecture is one of the most difficult for me to put together. This is going to be a fairly short lecture about a topic that if we talked about it for 3 or 4 hours, it still probably wouldn't be enough. But I'm hoping that this will be enough to at least get you started thinking about what we're going to be talking about. And this lecture is specifically going to be talking about power and privilege. Now, these can be really tricky topics, and my goal today isn't to try to change your mind entirely. What I want to do is I want to present some ideas and have you just start to think about them. If you disagree with me at the end of this, there's nothing that I can do about that. It also will not affect your grade because the way that I think about power and privilege may not be the way that you think about power and privilege. However, I do want you to start to think about this as a way that we can look at audience analysis and as we can get to know ourselves. So that's kind of what I want you to start to think about. So first off, what do I mean by power and privilege? What I'm trying to talk about when I'm talking about power and privilege is the idea that some groups of people have certain advantages that other groups of people just don't have on a systematic level. All right. Now, we're not talking about individual instances here. We're not talking about, well, you know what, I knew this one person who did this and it totally didn't, they had all kinds of privileges that I didn't have. All right. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the systematic overall look at how some people and some groups of people tend to have certain advantages that other groups of people do not have. Right? So we're thinking about, one of the things we can think about is the idea of money, right? If you were born into a family that had an unlimited amount of money, it seemed like, you never had to worry about something. If you asked for something, you always got it. If you needed a new pair of shoes, it's not that you had to worry or you had to wait or save up for it. You always got that new pair of shoes. That's a very different type of a family situation than if when you're growing up, you maybe didn't always have money for food, or you didn't have the money to be able to go on the field trips with your class, or you had to be on reduced lunches or reduced cost lunches and that type of thing. Those are two very different situations, and they're going to influence the way that you're going to look at money, obviously. However, that also influences the types of opportunities that are going to be available to you. If you were in a family that had a lot of money and you had a lot of opportunities to be able to use that money, then you wouldn't necessarily have to, when it came to education, you wouldn't have to pick and choose which schools you wanted to apply for based on what you could afford. If you had an unlimited amount of funding available to you, you could choose to go to an Ivy League school or apply to an Ivy League school, or you could choose to go to a state school or to a technical college or to go to no college at all. You've got all kinds of options available to you simply based on the amount of money that you or your family had available to you. However, if you came from a family that had very little money, then you would have less of an opportunity about which schools you could choose to go to, or even if you could choose to go to a school. And I think that that's a reality that some of us probably face. In terms of if you're talking about education, the education levels that we have also influence if we are going to be privileged or disenfranchised or marginalized. If you think about, I'm sure that you've known somebody who's a fantastic worker, maybe they've worked for a company for several years, and they've been passed up for a managerial position based on somebody else having a higher level of education than them. That probably isn't a fair thing for the person who has been working there for a longer amount of time and who has all of this experience, but didn't get that management job because they didn't have the degree. Right? That's another type of power or privilege that somebody has based on the education they were able to get. And that education opportunity they maybe had might have been influenced by the money that they had available to them. It might also have been influenced by the ability or the examples of their family members that maybe came before them. Now, in my family, one of the privileges that I've had is that my mom and my dad both attended some amount of college. My mom didn't graduate, but my dad did. And so I had these role models to set up, okay, this is how you go to school, this is how you find financial aid, this is how you have this is how you have that. If I didn't have some of those role models, it can be very difficult. For instance, a friend of mine just recently went into grad school. And she didn't know anything about how to get into grad school. She didn't have any role models in her family about it. So she came to me and asked me some questions about it. Without having me as a resource, and I'm not trying to call myself an expert on grad school or anything like that, but without having someone there as a resource to help her, she might not have been able to get into grad school or might not have been as successful as she's been in grad school. So we need to think about those resources that are available to us based on where we're starting out, right? Some of that's family, some of that's friends, that type of thing. We also need to think about things like the privileges of having a mom and a dad at home, or maybe not having a mom and dad at home, and recognizing some of those difficulties we face with that. Now, maybe you came from a single parent household where your mom was always home and you always had meals together and all of that, but that's not necessarily the case for everyone who comes from a single family household. With the need to have dual income so often these days, as in having two incomes coming in to be able to pay for what we need to pay for, sometimes it's very difficult for someone to be able to come home and spend time helping with homework and spending time making dinners and things like that. And if you don't have that home life at home, sometimes that'll influence the ability for you to move on and have other opportunities available to you. There's obviously other types of privileges we can see with different types of religions depending on the area of the country that you live in. Skin color is another very obvious aspect of privilege that we need to consider, that some people simply are going to be hired or not hired based on the color of their skin. And you may feel like, depending on what color your skin is or what you consider yourself to be in terms of your race, you may feel like there is some reverse discrimination there. But the word discrimination refers to a systematic advantage given to one group over another. And while there may be instances of this reverse idea where maybe being white isn't a good thing, or maybe being white gives you a disadvantage, overall, being white in the United States today tends to give you an advantage over other people. And in that case, that's what discrimination would be, which is a lot longer conversation we can have. I'd like you to take a chance to read through the Unpacking the White Knapsack by Peggy McIntosh. I put that up online for you to read. It's a difficult article to read because it seems like we're being attacked. And whenever we talk about power and privilege, it seems like we're being attacked. Like, why are you attacking me? I don't have all this privilege and all that. But if we can start to just stop and say, okay, we're not getting attacked. We're not trying to attack anyone. We're simply trying to understand the advantages and the disadvantages that we as individuals have, right? That starts to impact the way that we see ourselves and see other people. And it's also going to impact the way that we're going to need to see our audiences. The last thing I'm going to talk about is the idea of sex and gender. And the idea of sex and gender, they're two different things, remember, which I think was talked about in the demographics videos. But sex is the idea of the physical parts that we have, all right? So if you have a vagina, you're a female. If you have a penis, you're a male. That's the sex that we have, right? Gender is the way that we portray ourselves or the types of actions we make, all right? So for instance, there are some things that I do that are more masculine in gender. Things like I know how to fix cars. I tend to have a little bit lower toned voice in some instances. I tend to negotiate fairly well. I like to be in charge of things. Those are the types of things that would be more masculine in the way that I present my gender. In terms of my feminine gender, there are things that also go along with that, like I love to cook and I love to bake. And making things that are crocheted or knitted are also really enjoyable for me. So the way that I portray my sex or my gender in certain ways, or the way that my sex matches or doesn't match my gender, sometimes isn't a bad thing. For instance, when I was purchasing a vehicle recently, I was being very forward, I guess you could say, in the way that I was negotiating with the person. Now, if I was a guy doing that, there would be a different outcome. However, because I was a female doing it, I came off as bitchy or overly confident, and he didn't respond well to that, and I didn't end up buying a car from him because of the way that he responded to me. So there are certain things that I am not allowed to do because of my sex. There are certain gendered activities that when I use those gendered activities, like being an aggressive negotiator, there are different responses that I would receive than if I was a man. Again, these are not supposed to be things that are supposed to be attacking you. I'm not trying to attack, for instance, white men, right? That's not what I'm trying to say here. What I'm trying to say, and what I'm hoping that you can get out of this video, as well as the couple of readings that I'm having you do, is to think about the ways that we have advantages over other people simply based on the groups or the upbringing that we have. So start to think about this a little bit and start to look for those examples in your life. Because really, if we start to look at that, we start to see where this is the case. And this isn't, again, we're not trying to attack anyone. I'm not trying to make you feel guilty. I'm not trying to do any of those things. But we need to be aware of the power and privilege and the disenfranchisement and the marginalization that's happening for individuals if we're truly going to understand one another.